You think about the college football playoff era, you're not winning the national championship without your quarterback playing pretty well, if not exceptionally well. I mean, you start at the beginning of this thing with the way Ohio State was replacing quarterbacks right after left. I mean, over and over again. Jake Coker played really well in 15. Deshaun Watson, obviously, it goes without saying, 16, 17. Nick Saban makes a change that wins him a national championship going to Tua Tagovailoa, who did not play great. He might be probably, in terms of the games, national championship winning quarterbacks, that might be the worst performance from a quarterback. And then a season later with Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Mac Jones, Stetson, and then Michigan's romp to the thing this year. You're not going to have poor quarterback play and win the national championship. About as close as we got to that was 2017 with Georgia and Alabama, and we saw what Tua did on one amazing play. Other than that, it wasn't a great night for Tua. Go back and look. And all you Alabama folks, hey, whatever, man. I mean, it's the reality's reality. Tua did not play his best ball against Georgia that night, but they came away with the win. That's why when Kirby Smart starts talking about Carson Beck and what he can do to get better, it's really important. He said this past week in Florida, when he was meeting with reporters down there talking about Kirby, he said he was in complete command of the offense last year, but there were times I think he knows he could say, you know what, I can step up and be a bigger voice, be a bigger leader. This is something with Carson Beck that has been, an area of improvement for a long time. And, part of what I've done for a living for a long time is go and meet recruits, talk to recruits, Aaron Murray, Zach Mettenberger, Matthew. This is all before these guys played at Georgia. And then you see what their personalities are like. I mean, Matthew Stafford was a football nerd. He loved it. He was confident. He knew he was good. Aaron Murray was a football dork, I would say. Zach Mettenberger was a very confident guy. You think about, you could see with Jake Fromm, man, I was like, this guy makes a lot of plays. He makes a lot of plays. With Carson Beck, he was quiet. I wouldn't say a lot of time with Carson Beck, but I spent plenty of time with Carson Beck, enough to see what his personality was like in one-on-one settings. And this was some time ago, but he was not an extremely vocal and loud person. And I think that's something that, has been important to work on over time. And again, Kirby, you know what? I can step up and be a bigger voice and a bigger leader. He's challenging him in a way, because what, Jake Fromm had that came sort of naturally was the ability to lead and command. Jake Fromm's not as good physically, frankly, as Stetson, Jacob, Carson, but he was a very good leader. He understood how to play quarterback. But physically, he was not where those guys were at in terms of, their physicality, the ability to throw or ability to make plays in Stetson's case. Carson Beck's got to get a little bit of that going. David Green was sort of the same way. David, there were times David had a lot to work with. And then there was a 2003 season. So he didn't have much to work with then on that offensive line. The guy got sacked, I think, almost 50 times in 12 games. That's a lot. It was over 40. So if Carson Beck and Georgia are going to win the national championship, Carson's going to have to play well, but Carson's going to have personal development too. He's going to have to get better at the stuff he's got to get better at, or they won't. There will come a time in the season when, and I don't have double dogs right here, there will come a time in the season when the team will look to Carson Beck. And this past year, I think there were 2 times when that happened. The South Carolina game at the half, and then the Auburn game during the game. And in both times, Carson answered the bell. And we're going to see, as time goes on, whatever the situation is, if he can adjust and respond to the situation that he's in. doesn't mean that you lose a game, that you didn't do what you're supposed to do. It could just be that you just lost. Um, and I think for for Carson, like 99% of the time, it's going to be, what are you doing on the field? Like, what are you doing that helps us win physically? But there will come a moment or time, whatever it is, where, even though he's got number one overall pick potential, which means that you have plenty of ability, there will come a time when, he's got to do something. He's just got to say stuff or calm guys down, or it might be more than 1%. It might be a lot more than that. It might be that he responds in a way that he hadn't in the past, and people weren't expecting that, but it was in a good way. It might be that he, there's just kind of no telling. But I've seen Carson in high school. I've seen him obviously these 5 years, 4.5, whatever it is, at Georgia. I have complete confidence that he is the guy that can win Georgia National Championship this season. It's complete. He played so well in big moments this past year that, you're talking about a top 10 matchup against Missouri and what turned out to be a top 10 team. The top 10 matchup against Ole Miss, digging Georgia out of the hole against against Auburn. The same thing with the South Carolina game. The way he played against the Gators, just destroying, I think, undefeated Kentucky. But that was a big game in Athens. And then, look, the Tech game, the Florida State game, those were not Carson's. No one's going to remember those games. But he played pretty well in those games. Against Tech, it was okay at best. Tech and Vanderbilt were probably his worst two games. But, it's going to come down to, and Carson will be judged on the big moments. I think the good news for Carson and this program is there's going to be a lot of big moments before there's the biggest moments. And that's important. That's important. You have to learn how to react. It's not easy. It's when you're not used to something, it's not easy to pull it off. And I think that might be underrated. Here's for example, and it's, I don't know how great an example this is, but when you look at the college football playoff, the first season Ohio State won it with Urban, and Urban had upset Nick in the semifinals at the Sugar Bowl. Ohio State went on to win it. They're not the greatest example of this because that was the first season, but Ohio State's no stranger to winning. It had just been a while for them. A season later, Alabama wins the national championship. A season later, Clemson. Well, what happened to Clemson the year before? They had already played in two gigantic games. One against Oklahoma at the Orange Bowl, was at that game, and one in the national championship where they, where Alabama just outcoached them and out-athleted them at the end of the game. Onside kick was a genius call by Nick, won them the national championship. Nick's calls have won them at least 2 national championships at Alabama. And then when you think about a year later, Clemson, so it went Bama, Clemson, and then, Alabama, and then Clemson, and then LSU. They had a spectacular set of talent. A team that plays Alabama every year in what is often the biggest or second biggest game of the season. They were used to it. They played in the SEC championship against Georgia. They played against Oklahoma. It was, they were and at the beginning of the season, they played at Texas and won. That was a huge game for LSU in 19. In 20, again with Alabama, plenty of experience playing huge games. 21 for the Dogs, they had been there before. Now, everybody hadn't, but Stetson had. Stetson was on that 17 team. Kirby he had been on the 17 team. And they were just so good, as a team that when they lost to Bama in Atlanta, it didn't, I have to say, I don't think it bothered them that much. It was a wake-up call. So all of these things, Carson's played in a lot of big games now. Truth be told, he's played in the SEC championship game. He's played, a top 10 fight at home. He's played on the road against a rival. He's played against the Gators in his hometown. That's a big game for Georgia and Florida. Whether it's a big game, I don't know, for the national, but that's a big game. At Neyland, you got to save yourself against Auburn. You got to save yourself against South Carolina. You're playing Missouri, a very difficult team that you couldn't just knock off the field. You had to fight them the whole game. There's a lot of experience, and let me couple that with you open with Clemson. People want to dismiss Clemson. That's okay, whatever. But they got a really good defense. The offense is not where it was. There's no question about that. Carson's not going to be playing against their offense. He's going to be playing against a really good defense. Maybe not the best defense they'll see the whole season, but one of the best for sure. That's a big game. It's in Atlanta. Then you got to go to Commonwealth. Not easy, not a huge game, but got to go to Commonwealth. You got to play Alabama. Then you play Texas. Then you play Ole Miss. You get my point. You could say, and you got the Gators in there. You got Auburn in there. By the time playoff rolls around, the big game, Georgia will have a feel of that. So will Carson Beck. I think, though, too, what Kirby's saying is correct. All these guys, it's not just Carson. You have to work on your weaknesses. If Carson Beck is ready for the moment, when it's not necessarily even on the field, Georgia's going to be really good this season. And we'll see how that goes. Thanks for watching.